and we lose it. And there's so many times where it's just like, I don't know what in the world I'm doing here. Why did you put me in this situation? Why did I marry her? And why am I with these kids? And God, what is the deal? And a lot of times, guys, we want to quit. I'll just be honest. There are many times, and like I said, I'm being brutally honest this morning. Some of you are probably going to be, yep, shaking the head, amen, all that kind of stuff. Go ahead, that's fine. But if your wife punches you, that's between you and her, okay? There are times where it's just hard, and I'm like, God, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I just want to quit. I want to give up. And one thing that our wives want us to do, and they won't come out and really tell us this, but here's what our wives want to do. They want us to fight, okay? Your kids, they want you to fight. And that's what they want. They want us to fight. They know it's not perfect. They know you're not perfect. They know their family's never going to be perfect. But the one thing they want us to do, men, is they want us to fight. And even though our family's messed up, what we need to do is we need to hang in there and fight. And, I'll tell you, I got to thinking about it because this can be very discouraging. I was reading about it and I'm thinking, Lord, you want me to tell them about how messed up my family is and how hard it is sometimes, to be honest with you, because this is hard stuff to deal with. And I know some of you are like, man, Lee, it's got a hard, no, it's hard. But I got to looking through the Bible, and you know what? The Bible's not perfect either, as far as the family goes, okay? If you look through the book of Genesis, okay, let's look through the book of Genesis. Go to Adam and Eve, okay? Supposedly the perfect couple, right? God made them. He stuck them in the Garden of Eden, which was perfect, okay? No sin, everything's great. What happened? I'm not going to say she did it. I'm not going to go there. I'm not even going to go there. This was going to go wrong real quick. But somehow, they did what God told them not to do. And so they sinned, and sin come into the picture, and it got messed up. And so their family started off messed up. Ladies, how perfect would it have been? All right, let's think about this. Eve didn't need a wedding dress, okay? When they got married, she was naked. They didn't need a wedding dress. How perfect is that, And so they've got this perfect thing going on, and they mess it up. And then you go look at their kids. Piece of work there, right? You read about Cain and Abel. They give their sacrifices, and Cain gets a little upset and a little jealous, and what happens? He kills him. My kids, believe me, Bradley's little, but I already see the little glimmer in Brock's eye, sometimes, or I just want, if he wouldn't just go to sleep, Bradley, so they're messed up. And then you look through Noah, okay, which is one of my favorite Bible stories, okay? Noah. And most of you, it's your favorite Bible story too, because, there's the ark and the animals 2 by 2 and the arky, and you know the song. And so great story for kids, and there's the rainbow, and it's so beautiful. But how many of you, when you grew up, and be honest, how many of you when you were growing up in Sunday school, how many of you read chapter 9, Noah, when you got past the arky once it landed? They didn't do a flannel graph of this, because if you read chapter 9, and this is in the Bible, I kid you not, Noah, planted a vineyard, he got drunk and got naked. And got in his tent, and his kids were like, Dad, what is going on? And so one of his kids was like, I just saw Dad in the tent, and he's passed out, And he don't really, he just kind of walks away, and the other two are walking backwards trying to cover him up, Think about it. That's messed up, And then you look at Abraham. Look at that situation. With the whole, hey, we're going to laugh at God because we can't have a kid. And then let's arrange this little situation over here so we can have a kid. And God's like, no, that's not the way I did it. Just trust me. And then they end up having Ishmael and Isaac, and it gets really weird. And then you look at Joseph. Look at Joseph. He's like the golden boy, and his brothers hate him. And so they beat him up and they throw him in a well. They leave him for dead, and then they're like, wait a minute, no, maybe we ought not do this. Let's sell him into slavery, and then look how that ends up, And so we didn't even got through the book of Genesis yet, and we can already see that the family is pretty messed up. We'll just be honest, it's messed up. But the one thing that I love, and this is how we know God has a sense of humor, okay? The one thing I love is that He understands that we're messed up. And if you look in Ephesians there at verse 5:22, it says, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. And then drop down to verse 25. It says, husbands, love your wives, just as also Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. And then you read 6:1, it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord because this is right. There's one common factor that I see through this whole thing where Paul's kind of talking about our family. He's talking about husbands and wives and children, is that Jesus Christ has to be the center and the foundation of your family. If he's not, you just think you're messed up now. It will go so worse. You will fly so far off the deep end that you won't know how to fix it. Jesus Christ has to be the center of our family. He has to be the foundation. If Christ is not the foundation, then everything else breaks apart. Y'all know the story of the building a house on the sand and building a house on the rock and how all that went, right? Rains come, sand washed it away. The house on the rock stood. Jesus Christ, he's the rock. So that's our foundation. And so we need to understand that going into our next confession is, yes, my family's messed up, but Jesus Christ is my foundation. So no matter how bad of a sinner I am and how messed up I am, that as long as I keep my eyes on Jesus Christ, somehow he's going to keep that house on that rock from blowing away. Let's look at their second one. Confession number 2. We got through that one, and so let's move on. Being a spiritual leader is hard and awkward. How many of you believe that? Amen? I'm telling you. I just, sometimes this one is just, it gets really hard and really awkward. Because see, we're called to be men, dads, we're called to be the spiritual leader of our house. And going back to what I said before, sometimes our family's messed up, and sometimes we just don't know what to do. But God has called us, if you look at 5:22 in Ephesians, and I'm jumping around this morning, I'm sorry. He said, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church. Now, I know so many times I've heard this preached and I've heard it talked about that wives submit to your husbands. They stop there. And, I've heard preachers talk about how it's, wives have got to, make sure anytime he wants something to eat, you give him something to eat. And anytime when he comes home, you take his shoes off and you rub his feet and you do. No, that's not what he's talking about. Okay? That's not what Paul's talking about. And what he's talking about in this verse here, he's talking about wives submit to your husbands. Wives, give yourselves over to your husbands because, see, what it says here is that Christ has already said, look, you know what? The man is going to be the head of the house. As hard as that is for some of you to hear. The man is going to be the head of the house spiritually because that's the way I want it. And so when it says, wives, submit to your husbands, it's not kind of a coming home and bowing down to him thing. It's more of a, hey, let's work at this thing together. I'm going to submit to his authority, but I'm not going to just say he's right all the time. Because honestly, how many of you have ever heard that? Right all the time? None of us have ever heard our wives say you're right all the time. It's not going to happen. But guys, what we have to understand is that, we listen to this verse and it talks about the wives, but if you hear the back end of it, it says, you are the head of the house. And sometimes this is hard. And it's very, very awkward. It is one of the hardest jobs that I have ever taken as far as my family goes, is the fact that I'm supposed to be the spiritual leader of my family. And you're like, Lee, no, really? You're a youth pastor. This should be easy for you. No, this is very, very hard. Okay? Because here's what happens is that, my family, I can get up in front of the youth and I can be having a bad day and I can just come out and I can just, hey, we can talk, we can have a good time, and I can share Jesus with them. And then I go back home and my family knows, my wife knows when I'm upset. Brock knows when I'm upset. They know when something's bothering me. And so for me to walk in that house and be the spiritual leader, it's hard to do because your family knows who you are. And so, guys, we just have to understand that this job is going to be hard and it's going to be awkward. And let me give you an example, okay? How many of you have this happen in the car? Let's say you're getting in the car, you're getting ready to go eat. And your wife looks at you and says, what you want to eat? And you go, I don't know. And she says, where you want to go? You go, I don't care. And she says, no, seriously, what do you want to eat? And you're like, listen, it doesn't matter. Okay? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up a restaurant called I Don't Know, I Don't Care, and it doesn't matter. And every time my husband says that, I'm going to be rich. It's just the way it is. The wives are, all right, let's go. You know. But seriously, we look at it, you know, it's a funny story, but you think about it. I mean, there are a lot of times that our wives just want us to pick a place to eat. You know, they want us to lead, even in that respect. They want us to step up and go, all right, we're going to Cracker Barrel, you know. And, you know, my wife would be like, okay, let's go. You know, I mean, you know, it's not that hard. Even though sometimes we can be jerks about it, and I'll say, hey, I want Chinese, and Stacy doesn't like Chinese, and then she's like, you know, I don't like Chinese. Well, you said anywhere. So, you know, that's just the way it is. But we need to step up and be the leader. Here's why it's important that we step up and be the leader, okay? There was a study done, and it said that if the mom brings the kids to church without the dad, if mom brings the kids to church, there is a 1 in 50 chance that they will continue to go to church after they're an adult. If dad brings the kid to church, there's a 1 in 3 chance that they will come to church. And what's crazy about this, we see that statistic, but there's another statistic out there in the church that says that the church is 60% women and 40% men. And so what that tells me is that there's a disconnect that we've allowed men to just not really care about their spiritual leader, being the spiritual leader of their family. And so that's what I want to come here today and tell you guys is we've got to take this seriously. We've got to step up and be the spiritual leader of our family. And I'll tell you why it gets me so much is because the stat that they're talking about are the kids that I minister to. I want to see all of my kids, all the youth, I want to see them continue to go to church once they leave my youth group. And what it's saying is the family has a lot to do with that. And men, you've got a lot to do with that. As being a spiritual leader of your house. And so men, this is the way God wanted it to be. And so I'm preaching to me here. We got to suck up and do it. Just being honest. I think there are 2 ways that we can see how hard and awkward it is in our walk. And being a spiritual leader. And the first one is our walk. Men, the way we walk matters. I don't know how many of you have ever seen the T-shirts, and when I grew up, they were all over the place. But it was if you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk, right? Did I say that right, or was that backwards? Walk the walk. Anyway, I always got that confused for some reason. But, this is so true. Guys, in our walk, okay, the way we handle ourselves, the way we are the spiritual leader in the family matters. The way we conduct ourselves spiritually in the home, it matters. Because you know why? We're an example. Our kids are watching everything we do. And if you don't believe that, there's 2 stories in the Bible. One is in the book of Ruth, and one is in the book of Acts. You can go back and look at them, Acts 10, and then the whole book of Ruth. But there are 2 guys, 2 very different guys. One's named Elimelech and one's named Cornelius. And Elimelech in the book of Ruth, well, he took his family away from God. He said there was a famine in the land, and they were in Jerusalem, or Bethlehem, which meant the city of bread. So, I mean, think about that. I mean, if you're in the city of bread and there's a famine, come on. God's put you there for a reason. Okay? But anyway, he turned his family around and left. And then there's Cornelius, who just loved God and wanted to do everything he could for God. And he had angels come to him and, they were like, hey, Cornelius, we got a guy named Peter. We want him to come talk to you about Jesus Christ. And, he's like, oh, okay. And so their walks were completely different walks. And you can look at the outcome of their kids and completely different outcome. But it was because of the husband. It was because of the dad. It was because of that walk that the family went the way they did. So men, it's our walk. And this is, like I said, this is hard and awkward to think about because especially if you grew up in a family where your dad wasn't the leader, the spiritual leader of the household, this is going to be brand new stuff to you. It's hard and awkward. I mean, it just is. And so we need to understand that, again, we're the example. Dads, this means that, and I'll give you an example from my life. This means that when Brock hits Max, which is Dwayne's son, his cousin, and that has happened last night, when Brock hits Max, okay, and then I go into discipline Brock, and I spank Brock, okay, and I look at him and I go, we don't hit.